our program underway. We may be small in number, but I don't think we're really small in spirit when we come to this meeting. So I think you're going to have an interesting lecture this evening, and I know that I'm looking forward to it. It really is a privilege for me to introduce Dr. Kutzner to you this evening. To give you a little bit about her background, the major reason that she is in Iowa this week and will be here most all of next week too, I guess, before she really gets back to Washington. She had applied for a Biden Pell Grant with AID to carry out educational work, and I guess initially she's carrying out two programs, one in Iowa and one in the state of Ohio. And so she has put a lot of effort into working on the program, in which a number of Iowans are highly involved in helping to plan, which she'll probably tell you about. But it's World Hunger, the Iowa Connection. And this meeting will be held in Grinnell next Tuesday and Wednesday. And she will probably tell you a little bit more about this before the evening's over. And there are some brochures back there about the program. So if you haven't received one of these, we'd encourage you to take one with you. And if you can come to the meeting next week, please do, or encourage others to come, because I think there is a good program lined up. So that's the major reason that she has come to Iowa. But tied in with the program, she's making TV and radio and trying to meet groups around Iowa this week. And this afternoon we had her at WOI TV. She will be on the Iowa edition at 5:30 Saturday, and she's also been taped for WOI radio, and that will be heard sometime probably next week or later, depending on the legislature, I guess, and how much of that they will be still broadcasting. To give you just a little more background, Dr. Kutzner received her BA in History, Economics, and Political Science with honors and a general secondary credential from the University of California at Berkeley. And she received a master, an MA degree in German studies at the University of Bonn in Germany, and her PhD in Germanic philology, am I saying that right, Pat? Mm-hmm. At Stanford University, and a postdoctoral fellow with the American Council of Learned Societies, 1972-73. She is a Pi Beta Kappa. Dr. Kutzner is the co-founder and the executive director of the World Hunger Education Service, which is based in Washington, D.C. And the primary objective of the World Hunger Educational Service is to provide educational programming and resources across the country to various groups, many church groups, and those that are interested in pursuing hunger issues. I guess I got to know Pat when I went to Washington to participate in a 2-week seminar that they had. I actually can't tell you the name of that. It was Praxis. That's the part I remember about it. But it's learning about the politics of hunger. And I had the privilege of staying in her home in the inner city in Washington. And you will note, well, you don't have the notes here, but she has lived in the inner cities in the metropolitan areas when she's lived in them. And it really was a great opportunity to enjoy the hospitality of living in her home while I was going to the 2-week seminar. I think one of the things I remember very distinctly about the seminar, it was to educate you more about the political processes related to issues, in particular hunger issues. And one of the things they required was that you visit your 2 senators, or at least somebody in their office, and the representative in the congressional district you were from. And so before I went to the seminar, I made plans to go to both our senators' offices, and then at that time it was Representative Harkin was our congressman, and it was a real educational process. I think I learned a lot more about our congressional representation in Washington, the political process, and I've called on that several times since then. I'm not going to give you any more details, I think, about Dr. Kutzner, and I'd just like to introduce her, welcome her to you, and she is going to talk to us this evening about the current African food crisis. Pat?
Thank you, John, very much. I appreciate you all coming out in this cold winter evening. all of that background, it kind of embarrasses me to go back to the philology and so forth. I think, what's that got to do with African food crisis? And it really feels like a previous incarnation in a lot of ways. And you have a right to know as to why a German professor is in World Hunger Education Service. And I think the simple answer is deep disquiet about hunger. It was a troublesome awareness that something in me simply wanted to work on a whole lot more than I wanted to teach German, and though I enjoy teaching German. So I am very glad to be able to do what I'm doing, which is essentially working with people like John and others who are indeed knowledgeable and are themselves conducting programs and enlightening people and trying to get action and education going, and to lend them whatever kind of support I can from resources and information and strategizing together. This conference at Grinnell, the program, John is overly generous when he says, I did it, because I hope if you look on the back of the program, it tells you the Iowa team that did it, with whom I worked. But I certainly, there's no way a person coming from Washington could put on a program like this in Iowa. It takes a coalition of Iowans to do it, and it's been exciting to work with them. We've had a lot of the weather has not cooperated with our planning processes, but nonetheless. And we are indeed fortunate at the speakers that are coming. I hope you will take a look at that. And I hope very much that you can come and help tell other people about it. We have the former director of the Presidential Commission on World Hunger Tuesday night. We have one of the top experts in the U.S. Department of Agriculture on the African crisis as our opening speaker, and the head of the Food for Peace program in AID as the lunch speaker the second day, and also Tom Harkin's former aide, Holly Burkhalter, who is a specialist in Central America and the connection of human rights and hunger, is a speaker. And we close with Martin McLaughlin, who has a long history in hunger organizing and advocacy, dating back to the Marshall Plan days and coming down through the Overseas Development Council, currently the U.S. Catholic Bishops' Conference, International Office of Justice and Peace, and is the head of an ad hoc coalition or committee of private voluntary organizations like CARE, Lutheran World Relief, Mennonite Central Committee, AFSC, Bread for the World, and many others, who are trying to get our government to respond much more quickly and much more effectively to stem the worst effects of the African food crisis that I'm going to tell you more about tonight. In talking with John and others on the Grinnell event planning committee, I've been interested in what news has come through Iowa papers and television, radio about the African crisis, and I understand that as of now, very little has appeared. I think it's sad but understandable, because the media, mass media, have to try to stay on top of what they think is of most interest to their audiences. And of course the presidential campaign and a lot of problems in our own country are of pressing interest. So I just mentioned that because I think before the evening is over you'll realize what an enormous thing is happening over here, and has been happening for a year, and is going to go on happening for the rest of this year at least, costing already, they estimate, 100,000 lives in this country, Mozambique, Senator Percy, made a visit there in January and said he found walking skeletons and dying people sitting by the roadside within 15 miles of the capital, not way out in the bush, close to the center of where the most food would be if there were food. And he was so shocked that he came back and, with some other bipartisan group of senators, urged President Reagan to respond quickly to the crisis there. I'll tell you more about that. There has been some response, but there is a real snag with the political response right now I'll get into. At any rate, I want to mention that African thing, the fact that you haven't heard about it much yet, to try to raise your awareness, as mine has been raised, of how urgent it is for those of us who are concerned with third world issues, with development issues, and I'm sure with many other issues, to get connected to a constant or ongoing or updating source of alternative, quote-unquote, information. We simply cannot rely on the mass media for our image of what's going on in the world and be informed. There's no way that we can do that. And so whatever it is, whether it's a United Nations publication, whether it's the Agency for International Development's monthly publication, whether it's my own Hunger Notes, Bread for the World, Friends Committee and National League of Women Voters, United Nations Association, it doesn't matter too much which one of these you pick. Any one of them that you pick will keep you better informed about the third world than your daily newspapers and than your daily news broadcasts. So it takes more effort, but it's the effort that we really must make if we want to be part of the world in a significant way as human beings. Okay, taking a look at our three pieces up here, this is the new Peters projection of the world. It's quite different from the one that I grew up with in school, which was the Mercator projection. I don't know enough about geography to explain why it's that much different, but I understand that this projection reveals the land size of the continents much more accurately than the Mercator projection. That Africa really is that enormous compared to the United States or Europe. That Greenland really is that small. It isn't this enormous thing on the top of our maps. That India really is that large and is in fact larger than Europe. And other details about this which are rather astounding. I picked 3 countries in Africa to compare in size and some other things with Iowa, just for the fun of it, to get some relative proportions. I picked Nigeria, Kenya, and Botswana. Botswana is where the Kalahari Desert is. And those of you who enjoyed Lawrence Vanderpost, as I have, will want to visit Botswana. Okay, just for fun, I looked at those and said, how do they compare with Iowa? And I find that Nigeria here has 6 times the land mass of Iowa, 28 times the population, so Nigeria is a little crowded. Kenya has 4 times the land mass of Iowa and 6 times the population, so it's not really very crowded. Botswana, again, about 4 times the size of Iowa with 1/3 the population. Something like not more than 3 or 4 people per square mile in Botswana. I think those 3 contrasts are important to keep in mind as you think of Africa. There's no way to generalize about overpopulation in Africa. Some places indeed, some places not. And so you really have to go country by country to understand their situation. All 3 of these depend heavily on agriculture, although Nigeria has been neglecting it dreadfully since they discovered oil. And that neglect is considered to be one of the reasons for their food crisis. Botswana is a grazing livestock, as in Iowa is one of their major sources of food, major sources of income. It's largely veldt, I understand, with a good river basin, but it has had no rain for 3 years. The Kenya is about, it's a funny country. About a third of it is very arid, another third semi-arid, and a third very rich as an agricultural region. Kenya is troubled, and has been for some time, by refugees. The refugees fleeing from the war between Somalia and Ethiopia in the northeast part of Kenya, which is a very desert area, are settling in there, and they're trying to give them land to farm, but no water right now. Uganda is right next to Kenya, and during that crisis, refugees again into Kenya. So Kenya is troubled in lots and lots of ways. The life expectancy, I couldn't find out what it was really in Iowa. I expect it's pretty high. The U.S. average for a man is 70, and for a woman is 78, and I suspect that Iowa's probably several years more than that, because you have a very good health system here. In Nigeria, the life expectancy at birth is 48. You're old in your 30s. In Kenya, it's 54. You're old in your 40s. Botswana, it's 48. Literacy in those 3 countries. I assume that Iowa's literacy is very high. I put 99% question mark. Maybe it's more than that. Nigeria, 29% of the people can read and write some. Kenya, 50%. Botswana, 33%, and growing, but 33%. The income in Iowa, 1981, this is interesting, you may not have known this. I wouldn't know what it is in Washington. Income per capita for Iowa was $10,149. In Nigeria, it was 873. In Kenya, 432. And in Botswana, to my astonishment, 902. And I say I was astonished because a year or two before that, Botswana's per capita income had been $200. I said, what happened? 200 to 900? Diamonds. Diamonds. Botswana has the second richest diamond mines in the world, next only to the Union of South Africa. And they have just begun to exploit them. And they're very glad about this. But then I learned a problem. Botswana doesn't have the technology to develop diamond mining, so Botswana has gone into business, obviously, with somebody who does, De Beers Incorporated. And De Beers and the Botswana government are in partnership in the diamond mines. Fine. De Beers, like many, I shouldn't say that, De Beers, period, controls most of the world marketing of diamonds. Botswana does not. So Botswana can get the diamonds out of the ground, and there they sit, unless De Beers will help market them. And for the last 3 years, De Beers would not help market them because he wanted to raise the price of diamonds in the world market. So for 3 years, Botswana, I understand, has lost about 40% of the income they were counting on for their development projects. And they're hostage to their partners' ability to market their diamonds. So every country has its own peculiar complexities in trying to figure out how to make it. The drought in Africa currently affects 24 countries, pretty much all of the sub-Saharan Africa. Between the UN and the U.S. Agency for International Development, the estimates of the people at risk of famine range from 150 million to 300 million. I have a hard time envisioning how many people that is. Those numbers get over my head. But when you put what is the population of Iowa? almost 3 million. So that would mean that about 100 times as many people as live in Iowa are facing the possibility of famine this year. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization for over a year has been waving the red flag about this crisis and urging all of the governments that had any potential for contributing food or money to buy food to come forward with that aid. It's like everybody thought they were crying wolf or something. Last October they urged again, and a little bit more listening took place. Little bit more food aid was pledged. November again, January again. And it's really just in the last 2 months that our government has begun to take the problem very seriously, and that seems to have been because of pressure from the Senate, the senators who visited, and certainly pressure from Bread for the World, pressure from the Interfaith Action for Economic Justice, the name of the organization that used to be the Interreligious Task Force on U.S. Food Policy. It's it's awful to realize how many people have to die before the governments respond. This poster is a classic by now. Probably most of you remember that. That was produced at the time of the World Food Conference in 1974 in Rome, which was the last time of severe food crisis. The crisis at that time was primarily in this part of Africa, also in Bangladesh and India. The crisis at that time, you may remember in 74, also was due to a great drop in cereal grain stocks in the world. We had opened our sales to Russia, which had gone into the market for several million metric tons of wheat and corn. And so at the point when the African countries came for help, our stocks had dropped to one of their lowest points ever, and the price on the world market, of course, was very, very high. That isn't the case now, as you all know. The price of grain is not very high on the world markets. There's plenty of grain in the world. It's coming out of our ears. But the African countries that are in the drought no longer have any cash, any credit with which to go into the market to buy grain. They bought as much as they could. They bought and bought and bought until they simply cannot buy more and are utterly dependent on aid, food aid. Let me show a few slides at this point to illustrate some of what I've been saying and some of what is being done, and then we'll come back into the questions. Who can control lights? The north-south split is very well illustrated there. You know, we talk about the north-south dialogue these days. It has nothing to do with the U.S. Civil War. It has everything to do with the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. The southern hemisphere being, with the exception of Australia, New Zealand, where most of the developing countries are and most of the world food problem is. We have a food problem here, which has many of the same dynamics, but that's another story. This shows roughly from the point of view of the third world how the hungry are categorized. 40% approximately are landless, have no means of raising their own food, are entirely dependent on day labor and seasonal labor. 40% of the hungry, very ironically, are family farmers. In Africa, that picture is different. most of the African hungry are family farmers. There are very few absolutely landless people in Africa as a proportion of the population. Refugees, 5%, that will fluctuate from time to time. As you know, in the last 10 years, there's been a greatest surge of refugee migrations certainly in modern times, perhaps since the early Middle Ages. Urban slum dwellers, that's a problem that's growing very rapidly in Africa as it is in Latin America. A young girl from West Africa, probably from the French-speaking area, looking at the clothing. I don't know who this young man is, but he's got an elegant piece of cloth there. Now, this is a group of boys in Uganda in a time of normal lack of food. When I say normal lack of food, the month of May, I understand, in Uganda, in their language, means, the name of the month means the time when the children wait for food. It's before the harvest, after things have been planted, but the harvest is several months away. And it's a time when hunger is endemic. This is not necessarily a picture of people in a drought. It could be people in a village that has not solved the problem of food preservation, food storage, and waiting for the next harvest. The typical nomadic, livestock-based village of huts, probably in the Sahel area. Life is always precarious, but you can see from the trees in the background that water is present in the environment somewhere. In a good year, they will manage to follow their flocks. In bad years like now, the cattle have died and they are tromping into wherever they think they can find food in towns. I think Iowans have seen that kind of soil, I understand, last year or two. This picture was taken back 10 years ago in the Sahel famine at that time. It could be taken now. UNICEF estimates that in one of the Sahel countries alone, Mali, they expect about 100,000 children to die this year, and estimate that another 200,000 are at risk of permanent mental damage from serious malnutrition in their infancy. Food is being distributed in schools, in health centers, wherever the governments can get it. The World Food Program is a major distributor of food, and as you know, our own PL480 emergency food that is distributed by CARE, Catholic Relief Services, and World Vision, and a few others could be included there. That could be corn soya milk. One of the things that the in my view, some of the more enlightened African governments are trying to do in this period, and Botswana is one of them, is to prevent the people with no food from gathering listlessly in centers waiting for food, but to use the food to pay them to do public works projects which will promote the development of the country and leave the country a little better off when the rains do come back than it was before. Road building, irrigation systems, Botswana's building latrines all over the countryside, and fire breaks and so on. That is a major way that World Food Program food is used. I think almost all of it is used in food for work projects. AID contributes food to the World Food Program, but most of our food is put out through our own projects. Now this African children look when they are well fed. The vital, lively, optimistic, I must say, whenever I have had a chance to meet with Africans, I'm always impressed. And the people I've talked to who have worked with them find them absolutely charming people. I love those boys' faces. That's, okay. The drought is only part of the problem. And if you think about your own experience in Iowa, you'll realize what I mean. You have drought in Iowa. Some farmers go broke with it unless they get some kind of loans or federal programs. But the state of Iowa doesn't go down the tubes. The whole economy of Iowa suffers, but doesn't become dependent entirely upon somebody feeding everybody in Iowa. Because Iowa has a certain stage of mixed development behind it. So the countries that are suffering, like Botswana now, where the people are 44% at least of the population, according to the last figures, have nothing to eat except what the government gives them through the dole system. The roots of that kind of underdevelopment go back years. 10, 15 years ago, I understand, Africa, by and large, fed itself. Africa was not a continent that you associated with a great deal of famine and hunger the way you did Bangladesh or India or China before their revolution. I'll just leave that down. Why the food production in Africa has been declining, unlike everywhere else in the world, is a problem that is evoking a great deal of debate, analysis, controversy, but it seems to boil down now to about 5 or 6 major causes. I do want to make the point that Africa is the only part of the world where food production has been declining. Per capita food production has been declining, and even absolute productivity per acre, per hectare, has been declining. It's the only place in the world. That's important to remember when you get discouraged. Asia has been making real progress in food production. Asia still has, because it's the most populous part of the world, about 3.5 times as many hungry people, malnourished people, according to UN estimates, as any place else in the world. But that's a smaller percentage of Asians than a few years ago. And for that reason, largely because Asia is making progress, the percentage of the world population today that is considered to be living below nutritional adequacy is smaller proportionately than it was 10 years ago. In the Rome conference in '74, they estimated that about 450 million people in the world were chronically undernourished. They estimate 450 to 800, some people say 1 billion, but the 450 figure is the one that the World Food Council still uses, because the 800 million and the billion figure have to do not with food per se, but with poverty, income. The food figure comes out closer to 450 million. Well, 10 years later, we're having about the same estimate of how many people are lacking sufficient food, and the world has added more than 500 million more mouths to its surface. Well, if we've added 500 million more mouths, but not 500 million more hungry mouths, somehow the proportion is improving. It's a small improvement, but it's some improvement. Africa is the only place that it's been getting worse. One of the things is war. One of the reasons is desertification. in many countries. Another reason seems to be government policies which have kept the price of the farm gate price of food down to the benefit of urban populations, to the point where they say in Malawi, many of the farmers went on a kind of strike a few years back. They only planted a fourth of their land because the prices the government permitted them to earn from their labors, they said, didn't pay them to plant the rest of their lands. They planted only enough for their own families, their own village, enough for the seed for next year, but nothing much to sell in the cities. Another reason for the deterioration seems to be the neglect of women. There's a marvelous article I found that it was written by a women's organization in Zimbabwe, former Rhodesia, and appeared in Africa Now in December. It's called Daddy Knows Best. In recent years, across the political spectrum, there has been a renewed interest in the African peasant farmer and his problems. What price should he be paid for his produce? Should he produce food or cash crops for export? Is he getting access to credit? Are the necessary goods available in rural areas for him to buy? Next question. Is there anything about that paragraph that jars? If not, there should be. In many parts of Africa, it is women, not men, who are responsible for the bulk of agricultural production. This is not just a semantic point, but the peasant farmer discussed in World Bank documents and development plans galore is indeed a man, but it is not he who is primarily responsible for food production, the essential precondition for all other economic activity. Indeed, the habit of ignoring or devaluing women's labor is bound up with the neglect of food production and Africa's catastrophic fall from self-reliance in the last 20 years. The African economy, measured economic activity, judged in GNP and so on, only continues to survive because in the countryside a vast labor takes place, forgotten by the experts in the towns with their Western textbooks and UN economic indicators. Collecting water, tilling, weeding, harvesting small plots, grinding or stamping grain, none of these is the proper stuff of economic debate, let alone child care and cooking and all the other tasks. The economic planners and political leaders could just continue to treat half the population as a vast laboring underclass, but anyone genuinely concerned with economic development would do well to think again. The reason, quite simply, is that the women farmers know best what kind of technology will put more food on their families' tables. And they give some examples of technological innovation which have made it harder for African families to eat, not easier. It was not intended that way. This attention to the women farmers of Africa has begun to happen. I'm happy to say that AID is one of the agencies, our Agency for International Development is one of the better governmental agencies in trying to assess how a new technological innovation will affect the women in the area. And they're trying to bring women into the receiving end of development assistance. One project that I heard about, which I was really excited about, and very happy to know about in Upper Volta, at the UN World Conference of Women in 1980. I tagged around after the African women trying to find out what they were interested in, what sort of topics and what sort of problems and questions they wanted to learn about. And they always went to whatever kind of a workshop or presentation had to do with earning income. Income generation is the buzzword for this. They wanted to know about co-ops. They wanted to know about finances. They wanted to know about any kind of productive thing that they could take back home to help the African women that they were working with earn more money. Most of the women were village women. And one of the things that AID had done in Upper Volta, and has done, I think, a few other places, so I'm not sure, was to create a revolving loan fund for women's enterprises. I met the Upper Voltan woman who was in charge of distributing that $1 million. And she said it went to women who could present a viable project, but who needed some little startup capital, is what we would call it. And the startup capital might be as little as $25, $50. None of the loans were more than $200. That was an enormous loan. But for these small amounts of money, the village women would do ingenious things to increase their productivity and increase their family's income. This is important in hunger, incidentally, because they have found study after study after study that when the African women or the Latin American women or the Asian women earn more income for their family, it translates immediately into more food on the table. That's the first thing they do with it, buy food. But the second thing they do with it is pay school fees so the children can get an education. At any rate, what would they do? There was nobody in this woman's village making sandals out of the hides. The men herded, killed the animals, skinned the animals, butchered them, sold the meat. The leather lay there. Money for wood, for leatherworking tools, and the sandal industry was born. Another village, everybody had to walk miles and miles and miles to find scraps of firewood. That's part of the desertification problem, of course. Cooking fuel. They had to cook. And so they'd walk and spend hours and hours and hours, each household, collecting wood. Well, a couple of women got the idea, if we could buy a cart that we could pull, we could go out and bring back a lot of wood. Our neighbors wouldn't have to go out and do it, and they'd be glad to pay us for some of that wood. So they had a wood gathering thing. Cloth dyeing, food preservation, all sorts of cottage industry that these women would start up with their skills but needed a little bit of capital. That revolving loan fund had all been lent out, and this Upper Voltan woman said, I need more money because it's going to be a few years before all those loans are paid back, and I've got so many more applicants now who've heard about this grapevine with ideas of their own of how to help. It's incredible, the creativity that exists in the people that we often consider very underdeveloped. The creativity is very strong, and it's a challenge to find what's blocking them from carrying out, that step, that next step. What's in the way? What's preventing it? And is there something that we can do to remove that obstacle? And sometimes it seems to be a fairly small thing, at least with the women. It's easier to grasp the development process at a micro level like that than it is to envisage at a macro, national, or regional level what will really work. And that seems to be where most of the problems occur, sort of translating from this macro view of development into micro effectiveness. There's this great big gap in the middle there somewhere. I think I'll stop at that point at the moment. Maybe some other points will come out in the questions. I have a lot of things I could talk about, but I don't want to conduct a monologue up here tonight. So why don't we just stop for now and see what's on your minds.
So we'll just open it for questions, and any questions you want to raise or comments.
Has anybody here worked in Africa? I should have asked that right off the bat. Nobody yet.
Somebody's going to Africa.
What will you be doing, and where?
I'll be shipped out, shall I say, to Zambia.
Uh-huh.
And I'll be there for 1 month in June, and I happen to be assigned to study women's role in the small farming systems.